Hey, welcome to Tabletop Skirmish Games. I'm Lee, and in this video I'll show you how I painted Bahannar, the Lumineth from Mayari's Purifiers. Here's Bahannar all painted to a tabletop ready standard with mostly contrast paints. In this video I'll go through step by step how I painted him, and you can use these techniques and the paints used to paint all the fighters from Mayari's Purifiers, and they come in the Warhammer Underworlds Diachasm box set. And here's the miniature all primed, and usually I would use the Wraithbone Contrast Undercoat spray, but in England it's cold, I've got no opportunity to go outside and spray right now, so I undercoated him using a brush, and I've never done that, so that was new, and it worked great, gave a good coat, and I used the Ceramite White base paint for this. But then I tried something different. I took some Vallejo Sky Grey and I thought I'd paint in some of the values. I can't seem to find Ceramite White anymore, so I think it might be discontinued. And I picked up a Corax White, but I noticed they're slightly different. It's almost like a grey off-white colour, so just be aware of that. But here you can see where there's some natural shadow, and as I move the miniature, that shadow is going to disappear. So I took that colour and used the grey to paint in some of the values. So this is a little bit of an experiment, and I would say it's up to you if you do this stage, but I would recommend when doing the undercoat to go for the Wraithbone Contrast Undercoat spray. It's much better, and whenever I assemble the models I always use the Citadel plastic glue. In this video we're mostly going to use contrast paints and a couple of layer paints as well for some different effects. And the brush that I've mostly been using is the Army Painter Wargamer character brush, but recently I've got into the Kolinsky synthetic brushes and they're really good. I can highly recommend those. Okay, so getting straight into it, let's get started with some contrast wildwood paint. And I'm using this for the leather boots and the dark leather straps and the bag as well. And you can see here on these areas where there's quite a lot of creases and we'd get some extra shadow, I'm putting quite a bit of paint on the brush and pushing it into those recesses. And a great tip I learnt is that if you start and end your brush stroke where you want most of the paint to build up, then that really gets it into those areas. And then where the paint starts to build up on some of the raised areas where you perhaps want it a bit lighter, almost like a natural highlight or an area where it'll be highlighted, then you can just use your brush to wick that paint away and then push it or pull it around to the different areas where you want more of a shadow. And if you find you put too much paint on your brush, just wipe your brush on some kitchen towel and then you'll be able to wick up that paint no problem. This miniature is a lot kind of lighter and prettier almost than any of the other miniatures I've painted so far. So it took me a little bit of time just to plan out what I was going to do. And I went for the white undercoat just to see if I could leave the white areas unpainted, because I noticed on the artwork that comes with the set that there's no like shading at all on the white sections. So choosing a white undercoat might be a good way to go with this miniature. But if you do go with the Wraithbone, you're going to get a nicer tone overall, but you will have to do a little bit of touching up on some of the areas that do come through as white. And so really I think that's a choice up to you to make. I'm happy with how this turned out for sure. And for me, I wanted to save a little bit of time, so I didn't want to go over those lines in the white because it's very precise and detailed. And again, I'm looking for tabletop ready standard, so I want it to look good, but I don't want to spend too long on it. And so I found doing it this way, I was really happy with the result. But just be aware, there's two options here. You can go with the Wraithbone undercoat for a nicer tone overall, but you will have to spend a little bit more time touching up those white areas. So here I'm continuing with the wildwood and I'm going over the rucksack. I'm just being really careful not to go over the bottle or the sleeping mat. And I'm going to use some different browns for those later on. And I think it's going to be real nice to show you just how different these browns are. And that's one of the good things about the contrast paints. The brown leathers and the kind of natural colours are really nice. And they really suit certainly all the Warcry warbands. But anything like this, any natural leather material, they work really well. And this wildwood is great for wood, but it gives a really nice dark leather. Okay, so let's move on to Gore Grunter Fur now. And this is the colour I've chosen to do all the wooden handles of the weapons. This is a little bit of an orangey kind of brown, a real nice colour. And again, I'm just loading my brush up, not too heavy, and I'm just giving it a nice coat all over, and I'm trying to use the kind of the stick, if you like, the handle, and you see I'm rubbing the brush against it, and that's going to take off the paint and put it in that recess under the hand where we want that extra little bit of shadow. And so I'm using the miniature to help me get that paint off, and then I'm pushing it and pulling it around with the brush, making sure it goes where I want it to go. This miniature was a great opportunity to try out these different browns together, and I'm really looking forward to painting the untamed beasts, because they're going to have loads of fur and leathers. I think that's going to look really good. But for this one, I was really pleased with the different effects the browns gave. And against the white and blue, brown always works nice with blue, and I think this worked nicely for this miniature. So here I'm using the Kolinsky synthetic brush, and it's quite a long brush. It's a number 2, and the longer the brush, or the bigger the brush, I find you get a lot more control, certainly for these really small areas, and it's almost counterintuitive, but it's definitely better to have a larger brush, and it just holds the paint better so it doesn't dry out, and it gives you a little bit more control. You get a finer tip to the brush, and yeah, so you can get more control, nicer brush strokes, and I definitely recommend at least a number 2, and I'm going to be trying some larger brushes, and I'll let you know how they get on too. But here we are. So I'm doing the bottle in this same colour as well, and then that's going to be to show you a comparison when we add the next brown, which will be the snakebite leather. And I've got that now, but I didn't take a picture of the paint pot, but this is now snakebite leather going on. And this is for all the straps that hold on that bottle, and I'm also going to use this snakebite leather for the sleeping mat. And this is really great to show the comparison, and you could use this for the boots if you wanted to. Snakebite leather is a perfect colour for any leather, but I'm kind of following the box art, so I wanted a dark leather and went for the wildwood, but that would work great. On the box though, this sleeping mat was blue, but I just thought it clashed a little bit, and I really wanted to have 3 browns in one small section so you could see the difference as well. So I chose to use snakebite leather for the sleeping mat instead of the blue. And again, I'm just starting and ending my brush stroke where I want most of that paint to build up, pushing it into that coil where the mat's rolled up, because that's where it'll be naturally darker, and then taking my time. And now we're on to Cygor brown. So this is another brown again, and this is going to go on this little tiny tree, and each one of these miniatures from Mayari's purifiers has this little tree on the base, and so I'm just going to paint that on. And these bases are great for Underworlds. They all come pre-formed, and so you don't have to kind of craft the base. It saves a ton of time, and it adds a little bit of character and is part of the miniature, and I kind of paint it all as part of the miniature too, so I don't think of it as separate. Right, now we're taking some orc flesh, another contrast paint, and this is going to be for the little tree there, for the foliage. And I've loaded the brush up with a fair bit of paint, and I'm really pushing it in there to get that nice dark colour in the recesses. This is the first time I've used the orc flesh paint, and so I'm really looking forward to getting the bone splitters built and painted. I can't wait to have those set up as a warband for Warcry, and I haven't unboxed them yet, so you'll be able to see that soon. And I picked up the Wurgog Prophet, which is a great miniature, but I was really happy with this colour and how it looked here. Really nice green, and there's loads of different greens, and again I'll try and cover some of those together in a different video, just as I've done with the different browns here. But this is a really nice bright green, and I just thought it worked nicely with this miniature and the kind of setup you got with the base. Right, now I took some Plague Bearer's flesh, and this is going to be for these wheats, and I just wanted like a different green. It was almost a yellowy green, and I didn't want it to be too bright, almost like a wheat kind of grass, like a light grass. And then this is going to work really nicely, contrast against that dark green that we've got on the tree, and then when we've got the grey, it'll kind of break it up, and we'll have 2 different greens going on. And so I'm covering all of this now, this whole wheat plant, with this green Plague Bearer's flesh colour. And on it goes, loading the brush up, pushing it in, same thing with the recesses. And you can see this is going to dry a lot paler. Then I'm just using my brush to make sure the paint's in the recesses more and getting it away from the raised areas, which are going to be naturally lighter. And then taking my time, again using the miniature to wipe that paint off and then spread it around, make sure it goes where I want it to go. And then we're going to take, while it's still wet, we're going to take Agorist Dunes, and this is going to go on the top of the wheat plant, and I'm just going to mix that in and let that bleed into the Plague Bearer's flesh, and then that just give us a little different colour at the top, and it's going to be like a yellowy goldy colour with a bit of green mixed in and a natural fade between the 2 sections, and it's going to make it all fit as one plant. And now we're taking the contrast Acalian green, and this is really blue. I don't think this is green at all. And I'm going over the cloak. Now, when I've done cloaks in the past, I've gone really heavy with the paint, loaded the brush, pushed it right in the recesses and put quite a lot on. But again, I'm experimenting here. And so because we've done that grey paint underneath, that sky grey by Vallejo, and just to put in those values, those different values, then I'm going to try and just put an even coat of this Acalian green over the entire cloak. This is going to give us a kind of effect like you would get from a Zenithal Prime, and I haven't really got into that yet, and it's something I want to do. I'm going to wait till I get an airbrush maybe later on, but I've also wanted to try and do some dry brushing and try it that way. So I think on another miniature later on, I'm going to prime it all in grey, dry brush it white, and then use the contrast paints and see what that looks like over the entire miniature. Because I was quite pleased with how this cloak came out, and it's definitely something I want to practice and experiment with a lot more. And I think it would be good on a larger model to maybe try and paint the values all over it and even look at some black and darker greys and really try something else. So that'll be something I'll be having a go at in the future. So look out for that coming soon. But if you don't want to do this stage and you just want to use the Wraithbone undercoat without painting those grey values in, then just use one coat of the Acalian green and go quite heavy, load it up, start it in the recesses and the folds of the cloak, and then push it evenly across the raised areas. Wick away any paint that's started to build up where you don't want it to be, and just make sure there's more paint in the recesses, and you'll get a really nice effect on the cloak. And you'll see that on all the different miniatures I've painted in the past. So here I'm just taking my time going in these sections, but even though it's still wet, you can see that grey is coming through and leaving some nice little shadows there. So I really liked it. So I was really pleased with this. And yeah, I definitely want to expand on this and try it out a lot more. And I'm just making sure I go right over, being really careful now not to go over the areas I've already painted. If I do, or if you do, you just go over it with a little bit of the same colour paint you used on the undercoat, and then let that dry, and then go over it again with the colour. So say, for example, I went over that roll mat, I would just paint it with some of that white paint, let it dry, and then a bit more snakebite leather, and it should blend in. You might see a little area where that new paint is slightly different, but it's going to be so small. And again, it's tabletop ready. That's the standard we're looking for. You're really not going to notice it. And here we go. I'm just going along this. I'm trying to be careful here because this kind of edge of the cloak, I want to leave it white. And I'll definitely have to touch this up later on. But I'm trying not to put too much of this blue over that line. So I'm being really careful. Make sure I go in the lines and don't overlap where I don't have to. I've gone for almost real time with this video just to give you a good idea of how long it takes to kind of paint these miniatures. And with this cloak, you can see you've got lots of time to still play around with it and move that paint around. But now I'm moving up to all these little tassels now that are hanging on, and we've got these ones here. I'm trying to be careful on these little bits, but I'll definitely go over the lines, and you'll see we'll tidy these up later. And yeah, it was pretty messy there, but that's okay. As soon as that dries, we can go back with the white paint and touch it up. And then I'm going over these little tassels all along the cloak. And this is such a great colour. I really love this Acalian green. And yeah, really nice, really beautiful colour. And against those browns, I think it works perfectly. Really nice. On this front section, I didn't do any underpainting with the values. So I'm just going straight over it with the contrast paint and going in quite heavy. And you'll see at the end that you still get shadows and highlights from the contrast paint without doing any underpainting or zenithal prime. It's not going to be as pronounced for sure, but it's still going to leave a really nice effect. And if you like the kind of watercolour look and watercolour finish to the miniatures like I do, then it's going to work great. I'm just being extra careful here so I don't paint any on the handle of the hammer that I've already painted with that brown, and just making sure I move the miniature around. And so the idea is keep moving the miniature rather than trying to move around it, and make it as easy as you can for yourself. And whenever I paint, I try and get my arms like braced on the table so I've got nice control, and I always know exactly where I'm going to go with the brush before I start painting. And so I take my time, just pause before I go straight in, and that little pause just gives me that extra moment of control, and then it ends up with a neater finish. And the key with the contrast paints is just to be really neat. Don't put loads of paint on and slop it around. Be controlled with it. Sure, you have to put a fair amount on, especially for these recesses, but don't go crazy with it, and just take your time And if you do make any mistakes, just tidy up those lines and make sure they're nice and crisp, ready for when you use the next colours. And if you do that and take that extra few minutes to do, then you get a really nice finish at the end. And I think that's where the contrast paints can really look great, when you're really neat and tidy with them and just control the paint and don't let it kind of, in the past I've watched a lot of videos where people say like put loads of paint on it, but I think you just be quite sparing with it in areas. Like here, I'm not putting as much paint on the brush as I do in the creases, and so I'm being really kind of like delicate with it and precise, and then if I go over the line I'll tidy it up, and that'll give us a really nice finish later on. Now I'm just going along these little bits really fine. This is where the bigger brush comes in and works really well. And now I'm doing this little detail on the helmet there. And for this, I've gone back and forth, let it dry, touched it up with white, then gone back over it again with the Alkalian blue, then back to white. And so you'll see here that one of those stages where I take that ceramite white again and I just clean up all the areas I've gone over with the paint. So on those rocks at the bottom of the base, just giving it a nice thick coat of that paint to hide that blue. And it may take 2 coats of this to cover it up and hide it completely. But yeah, so just this is the time to really examine the miniature, make sure the areas where you've gone over the lines are all neat and crisp before you move on to the next colours. Again, if you use Wraithbone for your undercoat, then use a Wraithbone paint to touch up. And but it's really key, this point. It really makes a difference to the finished piece. And so I'm taking my time and being as neat as I can to make those lines nice and crisp. And you can see now I'm just going up here along this bit, and again I've got that Kolinsky number 2 size. You could use the Army Painter Wargamer character brush for this, but this one's a little bit bigger than that, and I do find it's better. So I'll put some links to these Kolinsky synthetic brushes down below, and also all the paints we use throughout the video too. But you can see on this bit I'm going to do those white edges now, and so I'm using the side of the brush, and with a nice amount of paint on there, those bristles have got a good amount, and I'm just rubbing the side of the brush along that line, and that's going to give us a nice finish. I'm just being really careful that I've got the right angle so I don't get any white paint on the cloak. So you can see there, just slow at first, use the side, don't use the very tip. You can see I still try and use the tip, but I'm trying to make myself use that side of that brush to get that nice crisp line along the bottom. And then here I'm touching up this bit at the top, and I went back and forth a few times on this because I found it really difficult to get it nice and neat and crisp. So it took me a few turns. I haven't included all that in the video, but I certainly didn't get it on one pass. I had to do the blue, then the white, then the blue, then the white, then the blue, then the white again until I was happy with it. So yeah, I found this really challenging, this part. But we got there in the end, and I was happy with how it turned out. And then once we've covered that bit, I moved up and just tidied up those horns where the little ribbons tie around it. And now we're going to take some Alkalian green paint and some technical contrast medium, and I'm going to mix 4 parts medium to 1 part Alkalian green, and this is going to give us a real pale colour for the inside of the cloak. Just like I did on the other side of the cloak, I've used some of that grey to paint the values in, and then this is going to go over it, and hopefully that's going to come through. I found that this wasn't as grey as I wanted it to be. With the box art, this inside of the cloak's a little bit more of a grey blue, almost like a Space Wolves grey. And I think in hindsight, I would have used that and just done 1 coat of Space Wolves grey. But you'll see later on, I put another layer and another colour over this. And but I was happy with that too. But I think I would recommend, rather than doing what I've done here, doing 2 coats, I would just use the Space Wolves grey. Maybe go 1 part contrast medium to 1 part Space Wolves grey, and then put that on and just go with 1 coat then. I think that'll give you a nicer finish and match the box art more. Okay, now we're taking some Guilliman flesh, and I'm just painting in the eyes and a little bit through the mask where we can see the kind of nose, and putting quite a bit on here because this is going to be dark inside there, and I really want to get that shadow around the eyes. And I haven't got to the stage yet where I can paint the pupils and things like that, so I just use the Guilliman flesh for sure, but I really do start needing to do more of work in the undercoat with that grey and then a white dry brush over the top. Okay, now we're taking some Stormhost Silver, a layer paint, and instead of using Lead Belcher, which I normally use on different metals and the weapons, I've gone for the Stormhost Silver because I want this to be really bright, and they're kind of These miniatures are really pretty. They're not as grimy as the Warcry original warbands or the Chaos warbands. So they're very different. And so I wanted to go for something a bit more shiny and bling. So I chose the Stormhost Silver. I think because we're going to have a lot of white, then they are really bright figures for sure. And almost like, I don't know how to describe it, like wispy in the colours and the look of them. They're very, very pale. And so I didn't want to go with a heavy metal colour. It would just be too strong, I thought. Once this Stormhost Silver dries, we'll be going over it with some contrast paints, just like we do in the other videos with the Lead Belcher. And that's another brilliant use for contrast paints, where you put like a layer of metal paint, let it dry, and then go over it with different colours of contrast paint for some real nice effects. Like if you use the Guilliman Flesh over Lead Belcher, it gives you a real aged bronze look. And the Agarellus Dunes, that gives you a real gold look. And then for silver, you could just use a Nuln Oil. Or on this one, I'm going to use more of a bluey grey. Because again, I don't want it to be dark at all. I want it to be really like shiny, as if there's light bouncing off every part of it. So I hardly want any shadow on this. I want it to be really sparkly. There we are. I'm just giving all this metalwork a nice coat of that Stormhost Silver now. So going over all the hammer, make sure it's right in there, in all the little recesses, so it's got a good solid coat. And that's going to give us a nice foundation for when we add that contrast paint later on. There's also little bits at the bottom here, and these are going to be gold. So even the gold sections, I'm still painting with the Stormhost Silver. And so you can see here on these little bits, almost like a chainmail maybe, kind of some kind of armor. I'm painting that metallic color as well. And I think in the box art it's a slightly different color, but I wanted to make it that gold. I thought it looked really nice. And having that yellowy gold against the blue and then against the brown, it's a really nice mix of colors to use. You've also got the option of doing that kind of animal head on top of the helmet in metal if you wanted to. I chose to just keep it white. I wanted to keep it nice and pale, but that could be metal if you wanted it. But all these little bits I'm just going over now. So there's a fair bit of metal on this with that large hammer and the horns and then all these little bits dotted around. So I didn't really want to have a big solid metal head on top. I just wanted to keep it quite plain. And so I'm just going over these now, giving them a nice little coat. And then we're going to let this dry completely and then we'll go over it with the contrast paint. And there we are, just finishing up these little bits that are embedded into the robe at the bottom and also onto the armaments on the shoulders. And then I'm going to take some Griff Charger grey, and this is like a bluey grey, and it's very subtle. I went subtle here. I didn't want any real shadow at all, so I've just gone for this colour, and I'm going to give it one coat over all the metalwork, try and get most of that paint in the recesses as well. And you can see I'm wiping the paint off my brush and then pushing it and pulling it around where I want it to go, and that's going to give us like a bluey kind of hint to this metal, but it's not really going to give us anything in the way of shadow. And again, I want it nice and bright. I don't want it to be like an aged weapon like we would do on some of the Chaos Warriors or the original Warcry Warband fighters. I want this to be completely different so they really stand out. And with the horns coated, I'm going to go onto the hammer. And you see I put quite a lot on there and it's gathered in that recess. So I'm just using the brush to wick that paint off and then push it around. And you can see it really goes back into the brush really easily. So you've got loads of control. And another good thing with the contrast paints, it doesn't dry really fast. So you've got plenty of time to work with it and push and pull it around and make sure it goes where you want it to. But it naturally wants to go in the recesses. So you'll find once you put that paint on, it kind of runs straight in there and goes into the little gaps. So you've got loads of time to move it, let it do its thing. And then once you get that paint in place where you want it to be, just leave it alone, trust the paint to do its job, and that'll dry, leaving some little bit of shadow, and but keeping those highlighted areas as you want them. And now you can see here I'm going with one coat of paint, and I haven't wet this down. This is a very pale paint, this one. I haven't wet it down, and I'm just going to give it a coat all over the inside of the cloak, and hopefully that's going to make it a little bit grayer. And it gives it like a little grayer effect. But like I said earlier, I think I would recommend just going with that Space Wolves grey and doing a 1-to-1, 1 part contrast medium, 1 part Space Wolves grey, and just do that instead. I think you'll get a nicer finish than I got here. Then I'm just using my brush to make sure that's a nice even coat. Let that grey come through underneath. Right, now we're going to take some Agarellus Dunes, and that's going to go over all the areas that we painted with that Stormhost Silver, and these are the areas we want to be gold. And it's really important that that silver paint is completely dry before you put this contrast over the top. And just going with a nice coat. I'm not loading my brush up too much. Just want it to be, again, nice and subtle because I want it to be really shiny. And so I'm just going to give it a nice coat so that we can still see that shine coming through, but it changes the colour and gives a real bling gold effect. Then I'm moving up to the hammer, and again, just putting it on nice and thick now because we've got a bit more recess that we want a little bit more of a shadow because that hammer is going to cast a little bit of a shadow down onto it. So there's a little bit more paint on the brush, not too much, but enough to give that little kind of difference in colour. And you can see that paint has gone right into those recesses already on its own and giving us some little contrasts in colours. And then go around the other side, being as careful as I can, really neat and tidy now. And then again, if you make a mistake, you can tidy it up. And it's surprisingly strong, this paint. So if you did get this onto any of the white areas, you're really going to notice it. So if you do, just go back with that white base paint or the Wraithbone colour and just tidy it up. And here on these, I'm just putting some on the top. And I'm not trying to paint it all, so I'm not trying to paint it as far as it touches the cloak, but just mostly on the top. I think if I try to get too much close to the cloak, I'm going to like spread that paint onto the white, and it's going to look messy. So I'm just putting it on the top, and for this level we're going for, you're not even going to notice. It's going to look like it's covering everywhere you want it to. Same here. I'm going all over the top of this, and then around the side a little bit, but I'm not touching the white paint. Okay, now I'm taking some Gryph-hound orange, and this I'm just painting a little bit on the raised areas that would almost look like a jewel. And this is going to give a real bright area and an orange that contrasts against the blue and looks really nice together. And that's just going to finish this and break it up really nicely. So this is going to look like it's almost like a jewel or a different kind of gold material, like on this little bit down here. I'm painting it on there, and that's going to just break it up a little bit so there's not too much of that yellow. Now we're taking Contrast Medium and Skeleton Horde, and I've gone 5 parts medium to 1 part Skeleton Horde, and I just want to go really subtle now, and this is going to be for all the areas that are kind of white or just off-white. On the box art, these kind of large sections here that I'm painting now, they're like in some areas they're left white, where the raised bits and the kind of lines that go around, they're this kind of off-white colour, and I reversed it. I thought, if I do the white undercoat, I could leave those raised areas in white and fill in with this off-white kind of cream colour, and then that's going to save a lot of time, and I should get it neater as well. I think I'd get a better finish. I'm not really, I haven't got that much control at the moment, so I don't want, I've got a lot of practice to do before I can do these really fine lines. So for me, this worked really well. And again, we only want a tabletop ready standard, and that doesn't have to mean it's bad or scruffy. Tabletop standard can be good, but I'm just trying to think of ways where it's like a compromise of my time. I can get a real nice effect and finish I'm happy with, but in a time that allows me to keep painting, and I've got loads of models lined up to do. So I don't want to spend too long on them, and so this was a balance that worked for me. But I guess you just decide what you like the look of. Maybe you like it to be white inside with the off-white around the trim and those raised areas. That's up to you. But I went for this, and I was happy with how it turned out, and I think it gave a nice finish overall. And it wasn't too much white on the model either then. So, having that shiny metal, toning down that white with this off kind of white creamy colour, I think it worked nicely. And these miniatures are a bit of a challenge to try and get these more like finer colours. And it made me like play around with the different quantities of contrast medium. And what I've done with the other 3, they were good like practice models, so that I could then come to this one for the video and be happy with how to kind of go through and finish it. The only thing I would do different, I think, apart from that cloak, the inside of the cloak, is on the helmet, on the kind of animal head on top of his helmet there. I'd probably go with a little bit darker mix of the Skeleton Horde, certainly in the eyes and everything. So I may even go back and do that. But I think what I would probably do is do this and then go back with a mix of 3 contrast medium parts to 1 part paint and just go in those eye sockets. But that's okay though, that worked out fine. And now I'm going to take some Basilicanum Grey and go over all the rocks at the bottom. And then we're going to give this one nice coat, and now it's time to be really neat. And, the order if you do this, again, is up to you. If I'd done this first, I was just a bit cautious that I might have gone over it with those other colours, so I decided to do it last and kind of almost work my way down the model and then do this at the end. And then while that's still wet, I took some agarus dunes, and then this is going to go on all the kind of earthy, sandy areas underneath. And on the box art, these bases are really pale, so once these paints have dried completely, I'll go over it and do a little dry brush, and that'll finish them up nicely. And so it doesn't matter that Basilicanum grey is wet, because they'll almost blend together and create a nice little shadow along the base of the rocks anyway. So just popping that on now, and now we're going to take some white, any white. I've gone for the Vallejo white and this very vegan makeup brush, and these are great. 2 for £3, perfect soft bristles, and I'm loading that paint up onto the bristles and then working it in using the paper towel. And then I'm going to try and take as much paint as I can off the brush, and then that gives us a nice dry brush that we can go over all these rocks with. And this is the time to be really careful not to get it on any of the other parts of the model. With this brush, it's a really nice shape because it's almost like pointed a bit, so it gives a fair bit of control. And once I got these makeup brushes, my dry brushing game went right up and improved a huge amount. And I can highly recommend either getting some nice dry brushes or some kind of makeup brushes like this. These work really nicely. And so there we go, just giving that a nice coat, and that's really brightened it up. Now I'm going to take some blue tack, put it on the end of the brush, pop that under the base, and that's going to give us a nice turntable ready to finish the model by painting the rim. I've gone for brown, and I think this works really nicely, and this is called Flat Brown by Vallejo, but any brown that you like will work for this. And I'm just using the brush with the blue tack as a turntable, so I've got a lot of control and I can spin that model around as I paint it. Just took this paint out of the bottle, added a tiny bit of water to my brush, and then mixed that in, but hardly any at all. And then that's going to give us a nice coat. And the Vallejo paints are really nice. They go on really good, and they've got some real deep colours. And I really like this deep brown by Vallejo. Again, I'll put links to all of this in the comments section below, so you can see all that. And what I do here, I do 2 coats, but in the video I'll just do 1. But what I do is I do a coat, let it dry, and let it dry thoroughly. You know, give it a good 30 minutes to an hour, so it's really dry. And with the Vallejo, I find they take a little bit longer than the Citadel paints to dry. So just take your time. Don't rush to finish at that stage. Give it a coat, and then once it's dry, go over it with a second coat, and that'll give you a really nice finish to your miniatures. But this is a really important stage of the paint process, and it really finishes it off nicely. And there we go. There's Bahannar painted to a tabletop ready standard with contrast paints. I was really happy with how he turned out, and it was great fun to try some new techniques, and I've certainly learned a lot from doing this miniature, and I can't wait to kind of build on that as I paint the next ones in the queue. All the paints and everything we used in the video will be in the description below, and you can use these techniques to paint all of Miari's purifiers, and all the colours and everything will be exactly the same. The links I'll put in the description will be affiliate links to Element Games, but they won't cost you anything extra. In fact, you can save up to 20% there by following that link. And for every sale made through an affiliate link, I get a small commission, and that's going to help me develop the channel. So thanks so much for that support. I really appreciate it. And I've also put a code down there that you can enter when you check out at Element Games, and that's going to give you some extra element crystals, and that's going to give you money that you can spend on your next purchase. And I get a few sneaky crystals too, so happy days all round. So don't forget to put that in when you check out. Let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. It'd be great to hear your thoughts and feedback. And if you want to support the channel in another way, then please take a look at my Patreon page. It's a great place to hang out. We've got a Discord channel where we share and talk about everything hobby related, and you'll get some benefits there that you just won't find anywhere else. I hope you found this video helpful, and thanks so much for watching. Please like if you like it, subscribe for more videos like this, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to join me next time on Tabletop Skirmish Games.